All right, so last week we talked about the graphic organizer, and this is really where we ended. You were supposed to go into your book and look at the graphic organizer and essentially draw one out for your end goal. So there were some examples on page 28 and 29 of your book, and I wanted you to do that for your activity that you chose or for your unit. So what you're going to do now is you're going to look at that graphic organizer and you're going to take the unit goals that you created from activity one. And I want you to have the goals that cover similar topics and kind of place them next to each other. And then I want you to write at least one essential question for each goal. So essential questions are talked about on page 30. Um, we talked about how we don't want them to have an obvious answer. We want them to kind of, spark a little bit of interest from the students. But you want to make sure that it also requires students to think. We want them to analyze and apply information that's essentially taught in the unit. So on page 30 and 31 in your book, it talks about essential questions. And what you're going to do is on page 33 of your book, there is like a little chart where it has your unit goals, and then right next to it has essential questions. And I want you to make this chart um, as part of activity 2. So you're going to be doing this alone since we're not in class tonight. But essentially, what you need to do is you need to take the unit goals that you all were supposed to write down or take pictures of. Um, Things always come up that's why I told you both to have copies for you and your partner. So you're going to take those goals and you're going to write an essential question for each goal. And as you're writing your essential questions, you want to go through the checklist that's on the bottom of page 33. So it's asking for stuff such as, is each unit goal addressed within the essential question? Do you have 5 to 7 questions? Does the question embrace the scope of the unit? Do the questions limit the scope of the unit? Does it spark interest in learning? Is it required to be answered by more than a yes or a no? So those are just some of the checklist things. So you want to make sure that you follow that checklist so that as you essentially answer your essential questions or the answers to them, they're going to follow along in step 4. Because we're doing this online, you're not going to pair with another group, but there will be a place for you to upload your essential questions and your unit goals. So the next thing that I want to talk about is a block plan. And it's important for you to understand that a block plan as a pre-service teacher, which is what most of you are right now. Some of you are new to physical education, but already teachers, and some of you are physical education teachers right now. But the block plan that I'm going to expect from you is a little bit more detailed than a block plan that you might see in a traditional K through 12 setting. Part of that is because I need to know what you know. And so in order for me to know what you know, I need you to write it down. So the basically the difference is that the block plan that you're going to hand in to me is more detailed. It's out in the real world, as I just explained, is less detailed. However, because most of you are beginning teachers or new teachers, you need to be able to communicate with me what exactly it is that you're trying to do. So included in a block plan at Wayne State, you're always going to include the day and the lesson number. The lesson number means, like, is this the first day of the lesson? Is this the 5th day of the lesson? Is this the 10th day or the last day of the lesson? That's really important. And you can't just tell me that it's Monday or day 1, because sometimes, like, you might see your kids 5 days a week, but somebody else might see them 3 days a week. Or you might see a group 2 days a week, 1 week, and 3 days the next. So you just need to be specific what exactly lesson number it is. Then you're going to have a warm-up or an instant activity. You're going to list your specific lesson objectives. And I'm not sure that I talked about objectives yet in this class, and so I will try to go over those a little bit later or on a separate video for you. But essentially, your objectives need to make sure that they have an action, a condition, a criteria, and then they should also have your cues. And so I'll give you more specific examples for that. So look for that uploaded on Canvas. Your block plan is also going to include a pre-assessment if you have one. It should give a general lesson overview of games and culminating activity. So you're not going to be displaying, or I'm sorry, writing, word for word what's going to be going on, but you need to tell me what's going on. So they're going to learn, I can tell by the objectives what they're learning for the day, but then you should at least give me a name of the activity and a very brief description. Then you're going to include any assessments that are going on. Remember, an assessment is not just observation. It needs to be written down. If you're going to do observation, there needs to be some type of a rubric attached to it. And then you should talk about what the closure is going to be. All right, so the quiz that you took last week, the book talks about 2 types of rubrics in the chapters that you read for last week, chapters 1 through 4. They talked about qualitative and quantitative rubrics, and right here we're talking about analytical rubrics. This is essentially like what you would commonly use. It allows you to have analysis of various elements necessary to the performance or the product. And then there's also a holistic rubric, which is more used for state level assessments where students are not given feedback. And so if you think about the SAT, that's going to be on a holistic rubric, and students aren't really given feedback. You're just given a single score or rating for your overall performance. The rubrics that we're going to talk about today are more analytical rubrics. And so the analytic rubrics, the examples that I'm going to talk to you about are the qualitative and quantitative rubrics. So the quantitative is a list of statements important to the performance. These also might be thought of as kind of your cues. And then you're going to assign one number that is linked to a statement that describes the level of the performance. The qualitative rubric is provided with written descriptions of the level of performance. And so when you think of qualitative, you want to think of lots of words. When you think of quantitative, you want to think of numbers. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is quantitative rubrics. So there is 8 steps to a quantitative rubric. First, you identify the content, decide on the phase or elements needed for performing the skill. Identify the critical elements of each phase, determine how many levels you want, define what each level means, develop a recording sheet, then pilot it, which means that you're going to practice it, and then you're going to refine the assessment. So to identify the content, you're essentially just identifying the skill that's going to be assessed. It's always good to find resources to confirm and inform the rubric process. So this should not be something that is just from the top of your head, oh, I think that this is how basketball should be done. There's resources and books out there. I know that we were talking last week about keeping your books if you stayed after for the MTTC review. Those books have the cues and the ways that you should be teaching things or skills. And so you want to make sure that you're using those resources. If you use an online resource, make sure that it's credible and not just someone from off the street deciding that they think that they're, important and putting the steps to dribbling a basketball online. The second step is decide on the phases needed to perform the skill. So you need to pinpoint the major elements in a certain sequence. So for example, the basketball free throw. There's 4 main things that you would touch on for the basketball free throw. You want students to bend their knees. You want eyes on the target. You have their elbow in, and you want follow through. So this can be known as BEEF, B-E-E-F. Bend your knees, eyes on the target, elbow in, follow through. So essentially, when you decide on the phases, you're kind of pinpointing the major elements that you talk about within the sequenced order. All right, so the third step is identifying the critical elements of each phase. So this means that you're giving further information for each stage. So for bend the knees, your feet are shoulder width apart, your toes are behind the line, and your knees are loose and bent to gain power from the legs. The elbow, one hand is positioned on the lines of the ball while the other is set as a guide. The elbow is tucked in and bent at 90 degrees. The ball is set on the fingertips of your hand. Your eyes are looking at the target. And then for follow through, students are going to follow through with their shooting hand and fingertips attempt to touch the wrist as you follow through. So step 4 is determining how many levels you're going to use. And then step 5 is define what the levels mean. So level 0 is students refuse to complete assessment. Level 1 is behaviors are exhibited occasionally, so 2 or fewer out of 6 trials. Level 2 is behaviors are exhibited sometimes, 3 out of 6 trials. Level 3 is usually behaviors are exhibited, 4 out of 6 trials. And level 4 is more than 4 out of 6 trials. And yours doesn't have to be set up like that. You can decide how you want to set it up, but that's a general way that it would be set up. Then you want to develop a recording sheet. You can do this by using a table function in Microsoft Word, or you can create it in Excel. Then you want to pilot the rubric and see if it's working or not working, and then you can make changes as needed. So this again is a quantitative rubric. There are examples in your book for you to look at to make sure that you understand. It's so important that you understand the difference between a quantitative and a qualitative rubric because you're going to have to do it. There's an example on page 40 of a quantitative rubric, and so you can look at that. They are specifically talking about archery, and they have the ready position, the knock, the draw, the anchor, and release and hold. And then they have 0 through 4 of what those trials look like. So go ahead and check that out on page 40. The second type of rubric that we're going to talk about today is a qualitative rubric. So there's 6 steps for a qualitative rubric. First, you're going to visualize the final product. You're going to brainstorm behaviors that represent what students should achieve, identify descriptors, then you're going to write the levels, pilot the rubric, and revise the rubric based on the pilot. So the first step, visualizing the final product. Similar to your graphic design, what is the total picture of what needs to be learned to accomplish the culminating activity? And so you need to understand what exactly that is. What is everything that it entails to create this final product? Then you need to brainstorm the behaviors that represent what students would achieve. So make a list of what you would and what you would not like to see. The would not is important because it's not just about what you want to see, it's about what is going to cue you in about what makes a good rubric. Or I'm sorry, what makes that a fantastic task. The third step is to identify descriptors. You have major elements that will be assessed within the rubric. You want to reflect the outcomes developed in step 1. Usually it has around 6 to 8 descriptors. It should only look at things that can best be assessed during the gameplay or culminating performances. So this should not be a rubric that you're going to look at for a closed skill. So shooting a basketball free throw would not be something that you want to use a qualitative rubric on. It really needs to look at things that are assessed during gameplay or culminating performances. Then think broadly, offensive tactics, maybe should assess moving an object or self to open space. Those are the types of things that you would use a qualitative rubric for. So once you have that figured out, you're going to then write your levels. So you create the type of levels that you want. In this case, we might have unacceptable, passing, target, and superstar. So we have 4 different levels. Could be a level for each grade assigned, an A, B, C, D, or E. However you conceptualize that is how you set it up. You want to write the level that is easiest for you to explain first. So essentially, these are like the very best and the very worst. And then you're essentially going to fill in the middle around those. So you know what is the very worst, you know what's the very best, and B, C, and D kind of fall in the middle of that. Once you have that all done, you're going to go ahead and pilot the review rubric and then make changes based on the pilot. So the last thing that you're going to do, and this is to kind of close up from class from last week, is that you're going to go back to your goals and objectives. And for each goal that you suggested to assess with a rubric, I want you to create one qualitative or quantitative rubric. And we're not going to do this for each. I just want you to create one. So look at one of the goals that you suggested, and I want you to create either a qualitative or a quantitative rubric, and then I want you to upload it online.